Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Red Couch podcast. I'm your host, Konstantinos, Drossos, and I'm here alongside my co-host, Mauricio Prado. And here we have Ken Judge, who is a professor of finance at Fanshawe College.
Thank you so much. And also, right now the student debts and budgeting, it's a big topic right now. So, can you teach about finance and budgeting? So, what is the most common budgeting issue you have seen in younger generations?
Well, it's a good question. Students really have to be careful as to what the amount of income they have versus their expenses. I mean, it might sound simple, but when a student has a certain amount of fixed expenses they have to spend, that doesn't leave much for discretionary or for variable spending, and they have to be fully aware of the income level they have to work within. So the issue really is knowing what their parameters are and what's important and where to spend the money.
Okay, thank you. And also, have you ever had debt in your life and how you dealt with it? Or I mean, as a student,
Yeah.
more exactly.
Okay. Back when I was a student many years ago, I did have debt, but debt can generally follow the same rules whether you're a student, whether you're a homeowner, or just the economy in general, whether you have revolving debt or a fixed debt. When you have debt, you just have to be able to service the debt, okay? And in order to deal with it, you have to know how much of your income is going towards the servicing of that debt. And as I alluded to in the first question, that will take a certain amount of the income away to service that debt, which is a fixed cost. So, the way you deal with it is to service it or at least have it manageable until you can extinguish the debt.
Okay, thank you. And also, as my personal experience as an international student, well, 85% of students here in Canada have student loans, right?
Correct.
And they have debt, and I have a student loan in my country, which helps me to pay the tuition here in Fanshawe, and the tuition fee, it's a lot for international students.
Mm-hmm.
And paying the tuition fees, paying my groceries, and also paying rent has become like a survival thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, what have you seen change financially for students? What changes have you seen now compared to in your days of student?
Okay. Yes, just the cost of living in general. So you have a cost of living that everything increases by a certain amount, but some items do outgrow that cost of living. Tuition could be one of them. But even today, the price of gas seems to be going crazy. So transportation becomes an issue. All right. Do you resort to a cheaper method, like maybe taking the bus as opposed to not having a vehicle at your disposal? There are many costs associated with having your own vehicle. So costs in general, again, come back to what is manageable, all right, within the income constraints that you have. There are a certain amount of expenses that certainly must be addressed, and the cost of living will erode or will eat a good portion of your income. But if you can manage those funds and think of alternative methods, okay, whether depends on how close you live to the college, you could even walk to the college, okay. I'm not saying you do that all the time, but there are certain alternative methods to alleviating costs that you must consider: carpooling, busing, walking, a bike. Any one of those methods can help you reduce your transportation costs. Now, transportation is just part of it. You get into rent, and I'm not going to touch tuition because that's more or less fixed on the program you're in, and being an international student, I don't know. I can't really speak to that as easily. But once you're here, there's costs here that you can manage a little better.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to dive more into is like rent or even purchasing a home for the first time, because we're reaching that age, especially for myself, where in high school I had a plan where I was expecting by the time I finished college I wanted to move out of my parents' place and have a house or even have a condo to live in on my own. But with the way things are looking nowadays, like with the housing issue and whatnot, it's put me off the trail that I had once hoped to be on. So one question I want to ask is like, what would be the perfect and acceptable circumstance, like in terms of how much money you have or even income wise? You know, can someone like myself look at and say, okay, I think I'm ready to move on and purchase a house for the first time at this age, like the 20s, like 23 or something like that?
Well, housing is just going crazy right now. So, again, assessing every situation individually, um, every student or every person, I shouldn't even really characterize as student, but I mean, that's the focus here. But individually, everybody must be aware of what they are taking on as an expense. Um, you talk about wanting to buy your own house eventually. Uh, the down payments, mortgage payments, interest rates, all play into that. And one's ability to be able to afford it now doesn't mean they'll be able to afford it in 5 or 10 years, because you don't know if the income stream is still going to remain there. Okay, so make it affordable now, but always have a contingent plan to be able to, change your course of action, or a contingency plan, excuse me, uh, to be able to address what situation that you're currently faced with.
Oh, okay,
And
interesting.
when you studied in college, were you living on your own or were you living with your parents?
I had the luxury of living at home. I wasn't on my own. And again, tuition costs back when I went were a lot cheaper. Um, but there was still some government programs for cost cutting measures. Like back then, there was bursaries and maybe grants or some sort of assistance from the government. They still have those today, but they would certainly help if those types of avenues were explored for whatever the student situation is. But yes, I had the luxury of still living at home.
I was asking that because I live alone here, right? And as I was telling you, I asked for a loan, which when I came here to Canada, I started paying 800 rent. Now they have been increasing that every 5 months, $50. So now I am like at 950, and I just received an email like a couple weeks ago that they're increasing that 49.99 again on September. So at this rate, I'm gonna be paying a lot of rent, and it's a building that is in front of college. Maybe I'm paying for that um, proximity to the college, but I don't think any student can afford that. I mean, to be honest, it's a pretty nice building, but it's a really expensive building. So at this moment, I'm trying to look for another place to live because it's not only rent. It's I had to pay my groceries and everything, and also pay tuition and all that stuff. So that's what I'm a little bit concerned about my generation in specific.
Yeah. And even the fact of that, just bringing that up, is that paying groceries. Like, of course, there's a necessity to pay rent for a place to live, right?
Right.
But I just read online like recently that, according to the University of Toronto, for instance, like they're saying that students pay upwards of like $380+ for groceries. Like that's absurd. And are there like how? Like it's just crazy, like how the level we're at right now. Back in when you were attending college, like what was the typical price for groceries if you were to go out?
Oh,
Like it must be crazy.
okay. Well, I mean, we're talking back in the '70s, so I can't really recall the difference of the cost of living back then compared to now, because some items maybe have not grown at the same cost of living rate. But just for comparative, like, the price of gas back then was probably like 50 cents a liter.
Wow.
Okay. And milk was like maybe, again, about 50 cents a liter.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's other items that certainly have become a necessity today that wasn't a necessity back then.
Right.
Okay. We didn't have laptops. Okay. Can you imagine that?
What about Wi-Fi?
Or Wi-Fi, yeah, stuff like
or
that.
Wi-Fi. Like there's a lot of items that have been added on to your cost of living today that were not even present 45 years ago.
That's true.
Okay, so to compare what a student needs today, you'd have to really sit down and compare what was needed, what was a student looking at as a necessity in the 70s as opposed to today.
That's right.
The necessities would change.
Right. And what are some tips you can give to students who need better control of their budgets? Like, what are some things? And you touched on certain expenditures, right?
Yeah.
But what are some other things that we could, touch on?
Well, just the student themselves knowing full well or having a good focus on what is it going to cost me to go to school and what do I have as an income, whether it was through grants, bursaries, or even their own income savings. Just whatever the income source is, it could be many different items. Doing the comparison, and because in finance, I teach money in, money out. It's as basic as that, is knowing what you have to work with and then how you're going to allocate the money out so you're not running yourself into a deficit situation, which eventually can snowball and cause you bigger problems.
Right.
And also remember that the majority of people, of students, even in Canada, they move out from different cities to here. So maybe there is people who are managing their finances for the first time independently. So for me, I mean, I'm 29. I know that what things I need to do. I know that being here and studying here, which is a dream, but it comes with some sacrifices. So it comes to decisions, right? So what I want to spend and what do I really need?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it comes down to necessities. Excuse me. You certainly need to know what the bare minimum is that you need, and then still make decisions based on, okay, I need, or I want, or I need, or I must have. Like it's just as simple as knowing what you need to function as a student.
Yeah, and that's like where like the worry or like the stress comes on that once you finish college, like once you finish your last semester of college, it's now time to scramble and find that summertime job so you can build that income.
Right.
So that when September comes, you can have some type of money to get by, right?
Yeah,
Despite how much it is.
And even though you're not in school, like you say, you're out doing a summer job, that's still budgeting because a portion of that is now savings for the future.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it and stuff like that.
Yep.
But yeah, and what is one thing that could be changed in the economy right now for students to have an easier time throughout college?
I like the question. I'm just going to answer it from a different perspective. Rather than throughout college, the way I would word that is how can things change for students once they have finished college, and how let's just say the economy in general can help them. And what I mean by that is the student debt load. Based on all the questions up till now, we are talking about student debt load, and it becomes quite a large item once they're out into the workforce. And if there could be some sort of assistance or breaks that they get for servicing the debt, or when they do their taxes on the interest rate on loans and stuff like that. I mean, it still affects the student as a whole because they're still maybe not a student now, but they're using their education to enter the workforce, yet they've gone into the workforce now with some student debt.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the help that probably people need when they get into the workforce. But what type of help do you need? You mean like, for example, government or something?
Well, more or less of financial management, money management. As a student, even as a homeowner, as someone that you form part of the economy in general, you still have to know how to manage money. It doesn't change. Just because you have more income doesn't mean you have an easier situation. You could have more expenses as well. Okay, so knowing how to manage the amount of money you have is will go a long way in helping shape your future and improve it from year to year. And like my situation when I was in my 20s to today, I'm in a much better position because I've been able to handle debt over the years. So just from a personal standpoint, I'm in a much better position today. But speaking from a student perspective, you're entering the workforce with this debt, and how do you manage it? Well, you still have to know where every dollar goes.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, even with OSAP as well, being able to have taken when I went for my first program here, I'm still paying off the debt from that. And luckily itself, when you apply for OSAP and you get the grants, it tells you how much you have to pay back. But when looking at what I have to pay back, I'm thankful that it's not a large, crazy amount, but it's somewhat manageable, right, within my finances as well, which I'm thankful for. So yeah.
And I just wanted to say thanks, guys, for inviting me into this. One thing I probably should have said at the beginning, but I'll just say it now, is any of the views that I have given here are my own personal views, and they do not reflect that of the college. It's just a discussion that you've asked me and my opinions of.
Yep.
And in no way do I speak for the college when I say any of this.
Nope. Yeah.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. And
Very
then
clear.
thank you, Konsta. And also, that's it for this episode of the Red Couch podcast. Follow and subscribe for more. This is the Interrobank.
See you next time.
Thanks.